Since yesterday, the new Heroic ++ or Titan Rune Beta Dungeons have been live on the PTR for testing. Thank you if over the last couple of days you joined me live while we was doing these, but this is going to be a quick few minute video, shouldn't take too long at all. Every time I say that, it's normally about 20 minutes long. So briefly, what are the Beta Dungeons like before we actually dive into the mechanics of each of them? Now, they are exactly what you would expect. They're not overly difficult, but they are more difficult than Heroic, and they're there for catch-up gear. They're there for alts. They're there for people who have just come back to the game. They've practically got no gear and they want to just get some catch-up gear ready to jump straight into TOC with. In terms of being a step up from just Heroic Plus or the alpha versions of the dungeons, I would actually say they're easier. And whilst it is only day 2 of them being live on the beta and they could change, I found some of the mechanics that they added a little bit weird, as in they didn't really make the dungeons more difficult, they actually made them easier. And I'm pretty sure there won't be a person viewing this now that would disagree when I actually explain how some of this stuff works. And now again, this is neither a good or a bad thing, because they don't need to be terribly hard because of the people they're actually aimed towards. And actually on stream, this was one of my many mini rants where I was actually talking about what Blizzard's aim of Heroic Plus was, and that was to keep the dungeons relevant throughout the entire expansion. Now, whilst adding better rewards to them in the form of Order War 10 gear, specifically to Heroic Plus or these beta dungeons, the primary reason still remains the same. If you're freshly dinged at 80 and you need some gear, you go into Heroic. During Phase 2, instead of Heroic, you would have went straight into Heroic Plus, and now instead of Heroic Plus, you're going to go into Heroic Plus. So it's still really only targeting that specific audience of people that need the gear to be able to get into raids. Again, I'm not saying this is wrong, and I'm not saying it's right. But if they wanted to keep these dungeons relevant throughout the entire expansion outside of just that pool of players that want gear, they could have really done with adding like challenge modes. You know, like what came in MOP, where you get silver, or bronze, silver, or gold, and even depending on the clear time, maybe increases the amount of the new currency you got, which was a suggestion by someone on stream, and I can't remember who it was, so apologies, but it was a great idea. Because actually trying to set server-wide records on speed clears, it would create some quite interesting content. But that's not what they are, so anyway, back on topic. The affix, or the rune, whatever you want to call it, that's tied to each dungeon remains the same. Instead, there's now just an extra mechanic, normally that interacts with the primary mechanic, that is from the original Heroic Plus or the alpha version. Then for Utgard Keep and Utgard Pinnacle, you already know the empowered rune randomly puts a glaciate effect on someone where you need to move and you leave a trail of ice behind. But now there's an extra mechanic which also works directly with the glaciate, because you can get a fire blast on you where you take 10% of your health a second and you take that every second for 10 seconds. The way you remove this fire blast outside of the obvious and just being healed through it is actually by walking into one of the paths of ice on the floor left behind by someone's glaciate. Damage seemed a little bit weird, like it weren't always doing 10%, sometimes it was doing physically 10, so obviously it needs to work properly, but the general idea is if you get fire, move into frost, if you get frost, move around until you've dropped it all on the floor. All of the Titan runes damage and health increase that the mobs and the bosses get as well has been increased. So whereas alpha was like 30% damage and 100% health, it'll be now 40% damage and 140% health. Neither the health nor the damage is really that noticeable. Violet hold Oculus and Nexus, where they all get the arcane rune, where attacks have a chance to summon mirror images of the caster, which have got like practically no health and they're really annoying and there's loads of them and you just have to kill them. They still exist, but also now when you do kill them, you get a stacking buff. This stacking buff gives you 5% haste and 5% movement speed, stacking 6 times for up to 30%. So this is one of the first places where I think you'll see that actually it makes it easier, because you've basically got a permanent bloodlust throughout the entire fight. The mirror images do a couple of other abilities that you won't even notice. The main thing is that you want to get mirror images down, obviously, to keep this stacking buff up all the way through the dungeon. So you're moving quicker and you're doing more damage. But the 30% haste, so you've got practically a permanent bloodlust all the time, is going to do far more damage than the increase in health that they've got, if you get what I mean. Drakfaron Keep and Gundrak is a bit of a strange one. So these have been historically quite annoying because these get the blood rune. So this is where it drops that red pool of blood on the floor, and when the mobs are stood in it, they get life stealing and basically heal to full quite quickly. Well, you can completely eliminate that altogether now, and it almost turns it into Gundrak normal, but where they've got a bit more health and damage, because you'll find these cauldrons throughout the instances where you'll take take 5% damage every 5 seconds. But if you've got this poison that you get from using the cauldron, you will completely eliminate the blood pools that are on the floor. They'll turn from red to green. So this means everything can stand in them and it's not going to be healing. Pretty much completely eliminating the hard part of the dungeons. Yes, there's going to be one person that's going to need to take healing pretty much throughout the entire instance, but it's not that noticeable. A couple of hots on him if you're a druid, or throw in the odd holy light as a paladin. It's far better just to have to heal that person throughout the dungeon than it is deal with the blood pools on the floor. Culling a Stratton was actually bugged, so I didn't finish a full run in here. We didn't even get past about the third wave before it just completely stopped working for us. But you'll notice that you'll get holy hand grenades out of the crates at the start, and you'll also see that there's some big giant monsters wandering around that are not normally there. This is what the hand grenades are for. So the hand grenades can get somebody who's been turned into a ghoul back to life, but they can also be thrown at the big giants and completely eliminate them altogether. It seemed a bit buggy, not 100% sure it's working properly, but that's the general gist of it, and what I'm assuming these holy hand grenades are going to be used for going forward. If for some reason that doesn't end up being the case, because it did work, you'll see I threw a hand grenade at a mob and he just disappeared. So I'm assuming that that's exactly how it's meant to work and how it's going to work, but if for some reason it don't, I'll change this section of video, take it down, put it back up at a later date. As Jolnerib and Old Kingdom are not finished yet, as in we can't even test them, so I'll just update you on that again at a later date. But finally, Trial of the Champion. Now this is going to be a dungeon if you are new to Wrath or you've never made it to this point in the expansion. Trial of the Champion will be a new dungeon to you. But the beta version is not that much more to worry about. It is definitely a more difficult one, but it looks a lot worse than it actually is. When you're fighting the bosses, the crowd are a lot more aggressive than they ordinarily would be. So you're going to find lots of things on the floor, like bananas that they're throwing in, which if you step on them, you fall over. There's leaves on the floor that you can pick up to restore health and mana. There's frost and fire traps on the floor, which act as you would expect. The frost traps put a frost patch down that slows. The fire trap does damage if you stand in its fire effect. And then you'll find some nice ones, which are roses that are on the floor, which is a 2% stacking damage and haste buff. Not quite sure how high this stacks because, honestly, the roses on the floor seemed few and far between. I was running around the room for ages and I think I found one. So don't expect to get this stack very high unless this changes. But overall, Trial of the Champion is actually a fun dungeon. I've always enjoyed Trial of the Champion. Even the jousting bit at the start is not that bad. But the beta rune version of it definitely adds a bit of difficulty because you need to watch where you're standing. There's bosses that fear, which means you could run through traps, you could run through bananas and then get stunned. I found myself getting chain CC'd as the healer quite a lot, just through pure RNG and me not paying attention. But Halls of Lightning and Halls of Stone has got to be the most fun. My whole party was just a guild group and every single one of them absolutely loved our run through Halls of Lightning. When you stand near the mobs, you get a pulsing damage buff, exactly the same as you do in Heroic Plus. It gives you 2% damage per stack. When you get this fully stacked up, so you're doing 100% extra damage, all of the keepers from Ulduar will start assisting you. And they are pretty much the same as Ulduar, where Hodir will protect you if you was to take damage that would kill you. Mimiron gives you 10% extra damage and 20% movement speed. Resilience of Nature from Freya is an absolute belter because it increases your damage done by 10%, healing received by 20%, but it regenerates 15% of your max mana every 5 seconds. This is bonkers as a healer. You literally have no mana worries. You cannot go home no matter what you do. You also regain 20 sanity every 5 seconds if you use no spells and abilities for 5 seconds. And Thorim, as normal, increases damage and allows you to kill something that shouldn't be killable. And the things that are not killable or shouldn't be killable is the Immortal Crusher tentacles, which are new to the instance. While you're fighting these, you can see that you've got sanity and your sanity will go down. So it's important to sometimes stand there and do nothing for 5 seconds so you get that 20 sanity back. But remember, that's only going to happen if you're capped out on stacks, so you've got the assistance from the keepers. This is why it's important when you walk in, the first thing you're going to be greeted by when you start the beta mode is an Immortal Crusher. You're going to want to leave this and go to the first trash pack and kill those first to get your stacks up, then come back and kill the Crusher once you've all got the assistance from the keepers. This really is a fun one. I know I've said it's fun like 4 or 5 times now, maybe even more, but it's really fun. Like, I'm not kidding. It turns it into like a speed run. You never want your stacks to drop, so it's all about chain pulling, but you never need to stop for mana because you're keeping all your stacks up. You're doing double damage, so the damage you can do is crazy, and you really could do big pulls. We took it safe. We was only doing 1 pack at a time, but I've heard of people pulling like, you know, a quarter of the instance at a time and AoEing them all down with all your stacks up. You know, it's that mental. So I look forward to playing with that one a little bit more. And that's it. As I say, it's a shame I can't tell you about Old Kingdom and Azjol Nerub yet, but as soon as I can, you know I will. If you go to the homepage of the channel and press live, you can look at today's stream. So today is, I don't even know what day it is. It's the 13th. So if you look at the stream from the 13th, if you're watching this in a couple of days' time, you can watch me going through these live. It's only a couple of hours stream, but most of the dungeons are being done during that stream. Go on the next one.